Hello, folks. How are we doing? Let me just add myself to the old screen. We're going to restart this. Aha, there we go. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Welcome to this session on GA4. Let me just grab up my screen sharing so we can get going. Good to see so many people in here early. I think that tells me a little bit about how we're all feeling about GA4 and the level of excitement that we're experiencing for this massive change in the world of analytics. So I'm just trying to find my screen. Bear with me a second. Doesn't matter how early I show up for these, I still end up being late. We've got some people coming from all around the world. We've got some people from the US. I think I saw Ron tuning in from the States. We've got people from sunny Surrey, Taipei, Taiwan. Wow, fantastic. Welcome, everyone. I'm just scrabbling around trying to find my screen. Let me just set up a new screen for you. So today we're going to be talking about Google Analytics 4 and the big changeover that's happening in, on the 1st of July. So from the 1st of July, Universal Analytics or Old Analytics or GA3, whatever we like to call it, is going to be going away, or at least it will stop collecting new data, and we will be left to fend for ourselves in the shiny, exciting world of GA4. Now, if you're feeling a little nervous about this, then you're not alone. Plenty of clients, and in fact, plenty of businesses out there are feeling very nervous about the move to GA4 because it does feel so different. Now, whilst we're just getting people, whilst people are just trickling in, I am going to, we're just going to do a bit of a survey. So I just want to know your level of comfort and your level of experience with GA4. So which of these sort of matches your situations? If you haven't set up GA4 at all yet, then you're leaving it fairly late, but drop me a 1 in the chat. If you've set it up but you don't use it regularly, then please drop me a number 2. If you have used it but you're not quite sure with what you're doing, then drop us a number 3. If you're using it frequently, then drop a number 4. And if it is your default, then drop me a number 5, please. Okay, so we've got plenty of 3s, 2s. We got quite a lot. Well, we got a lot of 1s. We got a lot of 1s. Okay, right. And we got, Robbie's a 4. Okay. It's mainly 1s, 2s, and 3s. Okay, it's mainly 1s, if I'm honest. 1s and 3s. Okay. We do have a couple of 4s. Ron, good to see you. You're what were you? A 3. Okay, good. Fab. All right, this is great. Perfect. Good. Well, let's talk about what we're going to go through today then. We've got an hour scheduled. I'm hoping that we don't go over this because I've got another call at 4, but I'm hoping that we don't go through this. Very quick session plan. So firstly, we're going to look at exactly what's happening with Universal Analytics and GA4. We're going to make this very quick because I think most people are familiar about all of this. We're then going to go through a GA4 overview. So I'm going to run you through. Most of today is going to be actually inside Google Analytics. We're going to be looking at a demo account and digging around inside. And it's going to be very sort of practical. We're going to go through an overview of some of the main screens. I'm going to explain some of the areas that you're probably going to be spending most of your time inside GA4. So this will be most useful for the 1s, 2s, and 3s. And then what we're going to do is come back into the presentation, have a talk about some of the theory behind GA4, because actually this can help us unlock the next level of insights and go a little bit deeper with GA4. We are then going to go through what I'm calling the sort of 80-20. So the 20% of GA4 functionality, which is going to give you 80% of the insights. And how we're going to structure this section is we're going to be asking a bunch of the sorts of questions that you might get from a shareholder or director, or what are the top traffic sources that are on our website? Which pages are performing best on our website? How's our website performing across different devices? And then we're going to go into GA4 and we're going to answer these questions with the data. And we're going to show you that there's a couple of different ways to answer most of these questions. We are going to be recording this session, yes. I have to also tell you, we've got way more registrants for this session than the capacity of the room. So if you get cut off and if you get, if you end up kicked out and you can't get back in, that's why. But we are recording it, and I think there will be a link that's sent out later on. So that's the structure of today. I've also got a couple of bits of free help for you. One bit of free help and one bit of potentially paid help. The purpose of this session is just to show you GA4. We're not trying to sell you anything at all. If you do need help with setting up GA4, getting your conversions tracking and everything showing properly, then we can help you with this, okay? We can help you with this. We do have this which helps you. So you can go to exposure.ninja/GA4. That's the first thing. You need GA4 set up, and particularly conversion tracking needs to be done. We're finding it needs to be done by a professional because it's a lot more difficult than it was in Universal Analytics, where you could just log in and say, hey, when my URL hits this, then that's a conversion. It's not so simple in GA4, so it does require developer support. So if you need help with that, then you can go to exposure.ninja/GA4, fill in a little form, and we'll talk to you about that. Okay, anyway, but what's happening? When's it happening? And why is it happening? Google, why are you doing this to us, you monsters? Well, as you know, GA4 is going to become the default Google Analytics from the 1st of July, when standard Universal Analytics properties will stop processing data. So they'll stop collecting data. Now, you'll still be able to view your data for a period of time. Google hasn't specified how long. At some point, your old analytics data will be deleted by Google, though. Sad times. So you do need to use GA4. You do need to have it set up. We've had most of our clients set up on it for over a year now, so it's been collecting plenty of data. But you do need to get GA4 set up as soon as possible. Now, I have to say that the overwhelming, feedback on GA4 so far is not good. It's really not good. People on the whole, whether they're, small marketers and small companies or large marketers, on the whole, they're not digging it. People do not like GA4. One of my hobbies is actually watching people slate GA4. And it's a great hobby to be in if you're into that type of thing. So here's some of the sorts of feedback people have. This was just feedback on one Twitter thread. A marketer just asked a fairly innocuous question about GA4, and people just pile in. The main criticisms on GA4 is it feels very confusing. It can feel really overwhelming, particularly if you're used to Universal Analytics and you kind of know how the screens work and you know the terminology. Well, GA4 is much, much more complicated, and it feels sort of much more detailed, I guess. It feels much more data-y. And it is. There's a huge amount more data in GA4 that you can play with. But the downside of that, of course, is that you're sort of digging through this mountain of stuff, trying to find the useful information. And I think that's one of my main criticisms of GA4 is that because there is so much data in there, it doesn't necessarily prioritize the most useful and the most important data for a marketer. Another criticism is that because GA4 works across apps and websites, it has a lot of shared terminology. And that can be really useful if you're a website marketer, because you've got to sort of hunt past all of the app terminology to get to the website stuff that you actually understand. So there's a lot of criticism about GA4. And like Ron says, when you first see the interface, you might be thinking, what the what? Yes, exactly. It can be quite tricky to use. There's also a bunch of functionality that you think would be there by default, but isn't. And they've still been adding new functionality. Like Shannon said, it would have been great to set up in June 2022, but GA4 wasn't even ready complete, and it's still not particularly complete. There's some really basic stuff which we'll see, which isn't there by default. But for those who are skeptical and don't like change, here's my, I'm not going to say promise, but here's my hope. If you stick with GA4, learn a few things, the stuff that we're going to talk about today, and give it time, give it experimentation, you will come to accept it, right? I think you will look back at this and say, actually, do you know what? GA4 was a good move, because the data and the amount of analysis that you can do in GA4 is so much better. It's a different league. You can compare sort of 3-4 different types of data against each other to find a new level of insight that you never could with universal analytics. Now, the trade-off is that, you know, that's not always the prettiest thing to do. And I'm not going to lie, the interface is gross. But once you get past that, actually, I think the level of data and insight that you can get far surpasses universal analytics. And there's a precision to some of the data, which I really personally like as well. Okay, so let's do a very brief GA4 walkthrough then. So we're going to head over to Google Analytics. We're going to be using a demo account today. We're going to be using this account, which is the Google merch shop. So people who want to buy like Google hoodies and, you know, YouTube t-shirts and stuff like that, they can go to the Google merch shop. And this is a GA4 account that is set up for the merch shop, which you can play with and you can experiment with. And I'm using this because it's live, so we can't blur out any, you know, account names or URLs. So this is like, it's going to be, you know, safe data that we can publish, which is obviously kind of important if you're going to be digging through an analytics account for the next hour. Now, the downside of using this account, obviously, this is an e-commerce account. We've got a lot of people listening who are, you know, service companies or software companies. So the data that you're going to see here is going to be quite different. It's going to be talking about things like transactions and revenue, which you're not going to see if you're a service company or a software company. But that's okay, because we're not going to spend much time in the e-commerce side of things anyway. We're going to be spending the majority of our time looking at things which are common across all different types of website. So when we log in, this is what we see. This is the home screen. And like Universal Analytics, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time in the home screen. I'm just going to briefly run you through some of the sort of main things that you're going to get used to seeing across GA4 if you're completely new to it. But we're not going to spend too much time in the sort of the very basic overview. Up here, we have the chart. This shows us week-on-week traffic. The dark blue line is this week. The dotted line is last week. Then we have a whole bunch of different metrics here. We're going to talk about users, events in just a little bit because they're kind of important and it requires a bit of a sort of theoretical understanding before we can sort of translate what we can see here. Now we can switch out any of these metrics. So if you click on the little drop down icons, you can see there are so many different types of data that you can have a look at in GA4. That is one of the beauties and also one of the curses of GA4 is that we have all of these different types of things. Some of them you may understand, some of them you may never have even heard of before. That's totally okay. Then we've got a sort of real-time section here as well. Then we've got recently accessed. So this is like your history. And then we've got a bunch of suggestions too. And then we've got insights and recommendations. And you'll notice this across GA4. This is a sort of machine learning powered bit, which you'll see on a whole bunch of different screens. But like I said, we're not going to spend too much time in the home section because most of the time you're going to be spending in the reports section. Now, the reports section is broken down into 3 main areas. You might see business objectives up here as well, but the 3 main areas that you'll be looking in are under the life cycle section, and that is acquisition, engagement, and monetization. And really, acquisition and engagement, these are where most of the action is happening, right? So inside acquisition, well, let's talk about what acquisition and engagement are first. Acquisition is how you are getting visits to your website. Okay, so this is where you're getting customers from. Now, it's fairly, I would say, self-explanatory. Maybe not fairly self-explanatory, but it's, you know, it's reasonably simple once you know how to read it. Similar sort of layout to the home screen. We've got a chart here. And we can change the date range as we want. So let's just go last 12 months here and we'll see how that chart changes. We can see a sort of somewhat real-time stats here. And then we can see some basic insight. But this is the report snapshot, sorry. The main areas that we're going to be spending time in acquisition are user acquisition and traffic acquisition. Now let's talk about user acquisition first, because this is one of the areas that confuses people the most. User acquisition is how you are getting people onto your website. Now, this headline summarizes a lot of the issues that people have with GA4. User acquisition, first user default channel group. What the flip does that mean? Well, what we need to understand is some of the concepts that are fundamental to GA4, right? Default channel group means the traffic channel that is bringing people to your website. Okay, default channel group just means the traffic channel that is bringing people to your website. So for example, organic search, paid search, display, referral, direct traffic. These are all terms that you probably are familiar with, right? Organic search means they're coming from, an organic search engine. Direct traffic means they're typing your URL directly into their address bar. So that's default channel group. Then we have first user default channel group. So user default channel group means how you are getting people to your website. And then user acquisition, obviously this is the first time that you get these people onto your site. So the difference between user acquisition and traffic acquisition, let's say that I'm scrolling social media and I see your website and I click on your site. Well, I might then leave your site, and the next day I might think, oh, there's that thing that I needed to buy. And I might go back to Google and I might search for you, find you, and then click on your website. Then, I still don't buy. But the next day, I then type your website address into the address bar. So there, I visited your website 3 times. Okay, so that's 3 different sessions, but I am still just one user. Okay, so user acquisition is about how you got me onto the website the first time. That's what this screen is all about. Traffic acquisition is about how you got me onto the website each time for each of those 3 sessions. Okay, so traffic acquisition the first time was social media. Traffic acquisition the second time was organic search or paid search because I searched Google. And the third time it was direct. Okay, so that's a fundamental sort of concept that we need to understand in GA4 because we see that throughout. And this difference between a user and a session can be a real cause of confusion for people. So we're going to come back to this in a little bit more detail later on. Okay, so what are we seeing on this page? Well, this is sort of fairly familiar, or it's sort of related to what we'd normally expect to see in universal analytics. We've got this graph here, and you can see each of these first user default channel groups. You can hover over them and then you can see their trend over time. Now, one of my criticisms of GA4 is that the fact that you're looking at this data on a sort of daily basis means it's very difficult to understand and identify trends. What you really want is a little drop down here that says, can I view this data by month? So then you can see the overall shape of the graph, but we don't get that. Now, there is a way around this, which I'll show you later on. But right in this default view, we don't get that. Then we see this table here, which again should be fairly familiar. There are some new terms which we might not be as familiar with. So for example, engaged sessions, engagement rate, engaged sessions per user. We're going to come back to engagement in just a bit. Event count also. Event counts is a little bit of a weird metric. Everything inside GA4 is an event. So when someone visits your website, that's an event. When someone clicks on something, that's an event. When someone converts, that's an event. When someone visits your site for the first time, that's an event. So every single item, every sort of action on your website is an event. So looking at event count is kind of pointless because there are so many events that are being triggered in each session. This is almost a worthless metric. And we see here we've got 15.7 million events happening from 353,000 users. So that's what, like 5 events per visit, 5 events per new user. So it's kind of pointless looking at this data. And then we have conversions. So conversions are, that'll feel familiar to you. What's a bit odd about conversions, particularly for this account, is you can set conversions to be any event. Right, so you can have literally any event categorized as a conversion. So again, we can see 1.8 million conversions here for 353,000 users. That's because this GA4 account, the Google demo account, has been set up in a completely moronic way. So we have all of these different events which are counted as conversions, including a first visit. Imagine counting first visit as a conversion. So this doesn't make any sense at all. Because I don't have admin control of this demo account, I can't take these out. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the number of transactions, because that's a sort of more meaningful conversion in this case. But when you're setting up your GA4 account, you're not going to be doing this. When you're setting up your conversion tracking, you're not going to be registering page views as a conversion, so you won't have this issue. And then, of course, we've got total revenue. Now, you might say, okay, where's conversion rate? I need to see conversion rate. Well, you can edit the columns in this table as you like. Again, in a demo account, you don't get this, but in your account, you're going to see a little pencil icon here, which you can click. And if you click that, you'll see a little metrics tab, which allows you to choose which metrics you want showing in this table, and you can reorder them. Okay, so what I would normally do by default is just to get session conversion rate showing up in this tab, so you can see the conversion rate of each session coming from each of these different traffic channels. Okay, so are we still with us? Yes. Okay, nobody's passing out yet, I hope. Right, that's first user acquisition. So this is how we're getting people onto our site the first time. What about traffic acquisition? So this is how we're getting all of the sessions. This is how we're getting people onto our site every time, not just the first time. And we see exactly the same sort of data here. Now, obviously, the traffic acquisition numbers are going to be higher, because for each user can have multiple sessions. So the number of sessions are going to be higher than the number of users. But other than that, this data is pretty similar. So that's acquisition. The next area that we're going to be spending a bit of time in, or that you'll find yourself using a lot, is the engagement area. So this is what's actually happening on your site. So what's going on in the different pages on your site. So this is really useful. This is kind of similar to the behavior section in old analytics. Conversions is one area that you might be spending some time in. Again, this is set up horribly. You can see they've even got page views tracking as a conversion, which is, well, that's someone loading a page. Hey, we've got loads of conversions. Conversions are up, guys. We're doing really well with conversions. Wow, look at these conversion rates. Yeah. But anyway, if your data wasn't set up like this, then this would be a useful view. Pages and screens is what's happening, how many sessions are happening on each, how many views of each page you're getting in each session. So you can see here, we've got all of the different pages that are being visited on the site, and we can see some metrics about each of these pages as well. We could edit this to say, engage time on the page or whatever. Now, you've got a couple of different view options here. By default, you're looking at this, which is the page path. You might also want to have a look at the page title. That might be more useful for you. So, for example, you can see this is the home page. You can see this is the shopping cart page. So it really depends on how your site is set up. A lot of the time, the page title is very SEO'd, so it's not actually that useful. It's quite difficult to see because it can tend to be quite long, in which case the page path might be a more useful thing to have a look at. And again, you might want to get your conversion rate set up or something on these sorts of pages as well, so that you can see the relative performance of each page. Now, you'll notice one of the quirks on, obviously on an e-commerce store. If we just go for, say, purchase conversions, we will see that they're let me just expand the number of rows that you can see here, so we can see all of the pages, or more of the pages on this site. You'll notice that all of the conversions are appearing to happen on the order completed page. That will be because, if you think about it, that's when the purchase conversion is being fired. So it's being fired on that page. So it doesn't mean that none of the other pages are performing well. If we looked at another conversion goal like add to carts, for example, we would see that those add to cart conversions are happening on other pages, but this purchase conversion is only happening on this page. Okay, the next section that we're going to have a look at under engagement is landing page. Now, landing page is one of the most important screens inside GA4. This is showing you, from an SEO perspective, your landing page is showing you which pages are bringing you in the most organic traffic. Okay, because these landing pages are the first pages people are visiting your site from. But it's a really important metric, not just for organic traffic, for all traffic, because the performance of your landing page can really sort of define the success or failure of each session on your website. If someone comes onto your site and the page that they're coming through is confusing or unclear or doesn't really set the scene, then that can really affect the performance of that session. It can mean that they leave, it can mean they don't purchase or whatever. So this is a really useful screen, and you'll probably spend a bit of time on here. Again, something that you might want to look at here will be your session conversion rate. So this is the conversion rate on sessions that start on each of these pages, and that can be super useful, super useful, because it shows you, let's say, people are coming through from this, people are coming on this this drinkware page, and lots of that traffic is turning into customers for us. If I just move this down to purchase, we'll see, you can see the relative performance of some of these products. The apparel page, for example, is doing very well. So people who are coming onto the site through the apparel page, you're getting more revenue from that than, say, the drinkware or the stationery page, for example. So that's why landing page can be so important. Now, let me just talk you through some of the filtering options that we have here as well, because there's a couple of different ways of segmenting the data that we're looking at. So I mentioned that landing page is really useful for SEO, because this basically shows us the pages that are bringing us in the most organic traffic. So how would we look at that? How would we, at the moment, we're looking at all the traffic that's coming onto the website. How would we look at this for just organic? Well, there's a couple of ways of doing it. You can either compare using these comparisons at the top. So we could compare the landing page performance of paid search and organic search and direct traffic, or whatever comparisons we wanted to run, or we could set up a filter. Let's look at each of these in turn. So let's say that we wanted to compare the landing page performance in paid search and organic search. What we would do there is we'd set up a comparison. So if you click on this little add comparison thing, you can then choose a dimension which is going to define your comparison. Now, this is a potential rabbit hole, so we're only going to look at this for traffic sources, but you can compare almost anything. You could compare traffic from different geographies. You could compare traffic on different devices. You could compare traffic, different age groups, different demographics, whatever you like, almost limitless. Now we're going to use traffic source. So I'm going to type in channel and choose the session default channel group. I then need to choose which default channel group I want to select. Okay, so I'm going to click on the dimension values and click on organic search. Now I could select multiple if I wanted. So if I wanted to compare organic and direct traffic against paid traffic, I could choose these two, right? But if I just want to compare organic versus paid, then I just need to have one. And you can set multiple conditions. So you could look at, organic search traffic that had come through on whatever, like mobile, that was coming from Delhi between the hours of 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. And they were 18 to 35. Like, you could go super detailed with these comparisons. Now, that's not massively useful. That's like trying to work out what an elephant is doing through a microphone, but it does show you some of the power that you have at your hands with GA4. All right, let's dump that and let's apply this comparison here. So we're now looking at all users versus organic users. And you can see here now in each of these rows, we have a sort of sub row for organic search. And we can edit this top comparison as well. So we could edit this to be, so we're going to go channel, session default channel group, and let's compare this to be against direct traffic. So we're now comparing the landing page performance on direct versus organic. So that's one way of looking at the organic traffic and looking at the landing page. The other way of doing it is if you're just interested in organic traffic, you could instead just set up a filter. So you can remove these segments and then just build a filter instead. And filters, the conditions work exactly the same. A filter just means you only see the traffic that is in this filter, okay? So session default channel group is organic search. That's the only thing that we're seeing now. Okay, So there we go. We can see our top performing landing pages. We can see the revenue that is coming from each of these. And we're only looking at organic search traffic here. So this is all the traffic that's coming from Google. And we can see the revenue that's coming through from each landing page. Does this make sense? Let me know in the comments if this is making sense so far. Okay, we're going to get a bit more advanced in a couple of minutes, but let me know that we're all alive and that we understand this and that we're not tapping out. Cool. Okay, great. So what we're going to do, we're just going to go through some quick theory bits. This is going to be very brief, but it's important that we understand some of the concepts behind GA4 because this allows us to sort of unlock the next level of insight. Now, we've covered some of these a little bit, but we're going to go a bit further down the rabbit hole. We need to talk about engagement rate, okay? Engagement rate is a new thing in GA4, and it's really, really useful once you get your head around it. Now, in Universal Analytics, the concept of bounce rate was very handy, and we used bounce rate to work out if a page was performing well. So when we'd analyze a website, we would say, oh, we've got a bounce rate of 60%. That means 60% of the visitors on this page are leaving. They're not viewing any other pages. You know, they're not converting. They're not going through to other areas of your site. They're just leaving. So that's a bit of an issue because we're losing all that traffic. In GA4, bounce rate didn't exist. It now does, but it's slightly different. Instead, you have engagement rate. Now, an engaged session is one that meets one or more of these three criteria. It lasts 10 seconds or longer. So in other words, someone stays on the page or stays on the site for more than 10 seconds, has one or more conversion events. So it shows, they convert with whatever event that you've set to be a conversion, which is another reason you don't want a page view as a conversion, right? Because then you get super high engagement. So they've converted, or they've spent 10 seconds or longer, or they've clicked on another page. So they've viewed at least 2 pages. Okay, so if any one of those things happens, Google says, that's an engaged session. And the engagement rate is the percentage of sessions where that happens. Okay, so that's pretty good. There's actually nothing about that definition that I would change. I think that is a really good definition of an engaged visitor, because if you think about it, with bounce rate, maybe someone lands on a page and they spend half an hour on that page and then they leave. But if they haven't clicked on anything, it still counts as a bounce. Whereas this engagement metric is actually much better. So they measure them slightly different. Now, I'm going to suggest that you forget about bounce rate completely and move over to engagement rate. This is going to be so important to understand all of the insight that you're getting in GA4. But just to make things a little bit more confusing, GA4 did bring in bounce rate. GA4 did bring in bounce rate, and it works slightly differently to Universal Analytics bounce rate, which is another reason why I'd say leave behind bounce rate, just forget about it. So here's how bounce rate worked in Universal Analytics. And by the way, if this is feeling a bit too much for you, you can mentally tune out for the next 2 minutes, and I'll give you a nod when you're ready to come back in. But the reason I'm explaining this is if you're used to seeing bounce rate in Universal Analytics, you get GA4 set up and you see bounce rate and it looks completely different, you might panic, right? We've seen it happen. Here's the difference. Here's how they work. So in Universal Analytics, old analytics, say you had 100 people come onto a blog post and 75 people left, right? They may have stayed, they may have looked around, but eventually they left. Okay, that will be known as a 75% bounce rate. Okay, because they left. They may have spent half an hour on that page, doesn't matter, but they didn't click basically, so they were a bounce. Now, inside GA4, those exits, those bounces would be treated slightly differently. Let's say that 45 people of those may have engaged with your site. They spent more than 10 seconds on it. They may have converted if there's a way of converting without a click. They've done something which indicates that they're an engaged visitor. Well, what you would get here is you'd actually get an engagement rate of 70% because you'd have the 25 clicks plus the 45 engagements. Now, inside GA4, bounce rate is the inverse of engagement rate. So your bounce rate in GA4 in this scenario would be 30%. So you might have exactly the same scenario happen in GA4 and Universal Analytics, But in GA4, your bounce rate would be 30%. In Universal Analytics, your bounce rate would be 75%. So that's why, exactly what Ron says, engagement rate is a much more accurate and useful metric. I would suggest just killing off bounce rate. Forget it ever existed. Engagement rate is really useful and you can optimize for it better. So happy days. Right, those who have been mentally tuned out and have gone for a bit of a wee, we're back in the room. Next thing that we need to understand is users versus sessions. Now, we covered this sort of briefly. For those who are tuning in late though, users are people and sessions are visits to your website. So I can visit your website 5 times. I'm one user, there's 5 sessions, okay? That's a really important distinction because you'll see users and sessions all around GA4. And if you don't understand that, it can be really confusing. So user acquisition is how people first find you. Okay, this is how you get someone onto your website for the first time. Traffic acquisition is where those visits come from. Okay, so where those visits come from, where the sessions come from. That means you have 2 conversion rates inside GA4. You have a session conversion rate and a user conversion rate. So the session conversion rate is the percentage of sessions where a conversion happens. A user conversion rate is the percentage of people that convert. So usually your user conversion rate should be higher than your session conversion rate because each user will have maybe multiple sessions before they convert. Okay, and you can track each of these metrics, you can measure against each of them. It's important that you're consistent when you're measuring and comparing. You have to, usually you just pick one of these and you would stick with that. So for me, session conversion rate is pretty useful. I tend to sort of default to that one, but there are times when user conversion rate can also be useful. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. Ron says, seems like user is more the one to track. It does depend. It depends whether you want multiple conversions from each user. If you've got people coming back to repurchase, then, session conversion rate can be a useful one. Okay, let's talk about, firstly, do you have any questions on any of this type of stuff? Jack Butler says, what's a good engagement rate? It's really difficult to say, Jack, because it depends on the type of site and it depends on your traffic sources and all that type of stuff. We do actually have a piece of software that we're building, which is going to help you with that. I'll tell you a bit about that at the end. There's going to be a free tier available, but this is going to be super cool. And that is going to help you understand GA4 and plug in. Basically, you plug it into your GA4 account. It gives you plain English explanations of what's going on and compares your results to others in your industry. It's amazing. I'll tell you more about that a little bit later on. Emma says, why is revenue not showing up? Emma, if revenue is not showing up in your GA4 account, it's going to be a tracking issue. Again, you can get some help from the Exposure Ninja team to get this set up. It's not massively simple in GA4 to get these sorts of things set up. So if you're not seeing the data that you need in GA4, and you want some help getting conversion tracking or whatever set up, then go to exposure.ninja/GA4 and we can give you a hand with this. Okay, let's talk about the GA4 80/20. So this is the 20% of screens which are going to give you 80% of the takeaways. Sound good? And how we're going to frame this section is we're going to ask the sort of questions that we're going to be being asked, right? How's performance across different devices? What traffic sources are being best for us? What pages on our website are performing best? So we're going to ask ourselves these questions and then we're going to go and answer them inside GA4 so you can see the different ways of finding the answers to these questions. So we're going to do this inside GA4 using the same demo account. And we're going to go a little bit more in detail here, and I'm going to show you some cool functionality. Actually, my favorite functionality inside GA4. It ain't pretty, but it's useful. So the first question we're going to ask and answer is which pages delivered the most traffic and conversions? There are 2 ways to find this info. If we head back over to our analytics account, which pages delivered the most traffic and conversions? Remember, we can do this in the default sort of reports section, which we're going to see over here. So the pages that are delivering the most traffic and conversions, we're going to assume that that means landing pages. So we could go into the engagement section and we could click on landing pages. And we can see, we can see which pages are delivering the most traffic and conversions. But there's another area inside GA4, which is, for me, where most of its power comes from, and that is explorations. Now, I've got to be honest, I love explorations, and I think I love explorations an unhealthy amount, because this is the Google GA4 demo account, right? And all of the explorations that people have made inside the GA4 demo account, which is worldwide, are on this screen. Have a look at who's using them. It's your boy Timmy. And we're looking here. This is like, what, 2.5 years worth of data. Look, the majority of these have been made by me. No one else is freaking using this stuff. And this stuff is killer. But it's ugly. It's ugly. It's really, really ugly. But it's super cool. Anyway, so we've got a whole bunch of different explorations that we can use. And these are basically different ways to visualize your data. It's so powerful. Now, inside the template gallery, you can see loads of different types of exploration. They all look really, really pretty. They all look really nice, but they don't look as good when you actually get into them as these little icons, just to spoil the fun. Now, I'm not going to go through path or funnel exploration because we do that in a video which we're releasing on Monday, all about how to use GA4 for revenue. What we're going to look at today is freeform, which is the sort of default exploration. So let's give that a click, and we'll see how this thing works. So just to explain what we're seeing on the screen, on the right-hand side, we have the sort of the data visualization. So this is the table that we've produced. On the left-hand side, we have two tabs. We've got the variable, or the variables, and we've got the settings, okay? And we can set up different tabs, and each of these different tabs, each of these little, these little things will have their own settings. Now, the variables, these are like the different sources of data that you can analyze. I don't know if you know, like, synthesizers in music, right? You think of like Emerson, Lake and Palmer in the old days, and they had these synthesizers, and they held all these wires coming from these, these modulators and stuff, and they could wire them all together and combine all of these different sounds to make crazy music. Well, that's what you can do with GA4 explorations. You've got all of these different types of data that you can compare and analyze against each other to find different insights. So they're broken up into different sort of groups. So let's look at dimensions as an example. So dimensions is all the, I don't know what you call them other than dimensions, but they're all the different types of data basically. So going back to my original question, which pages delivered the most traffic and conversions? What we might want to do, at the moment, we're looking at the different towns and cities, and we're looking at traffic from different towns and cities against devices. That's not what I want to do, though. So I'm going to remove my towns and cities, and instead, I want to look at the revenue that's being generated from my top landing pages. Okay, so I want to look at my landing pages, and then I want to see the performance of each of those landing pages. So I'm going to open a new dimension here, and I'm just going to type in landing page. Right, there's my landing page data. So I'm going to import that, and now you can see that's just been added to my dimensions. So I can then use this data. It's not showing up in the table by default, but if I drag it over to my rows here, and I put it in my rows, you'll now see that I'm going to see all of my landing pages here, and each of these landing pages will have its own row. Now, I can only see 10 at the moment, so I'm going to expand that and go to 50, and that's going to show me my 50 landing pages, and I'm going to see all of my users that are coming onto the site. And I'm looking at these, I'm looking at my, I've got my devices here as well. I'm just to make this a little bit simpler, I'm going to remove devices for now. Stick with me, peeps, stick with me. You're going to learn to love this explorations, I promise. Even if you're thinking, what on earth is he chatting about? Okay, so we've got all of our landing pages down here on the side, and we can see all of the active users that are here. But I want to know which of these landing pages is not just bringing me users, it's bringing me sessions, and it's bringing me conversions. So I need to add in this values section, I need to add in sessions. So underneath metrics, I can click on the plus icon, and then I can choose sessions. Here we go, sessions, there we go, add in that. So now I can add in this metric into values here. And it's, as well as showing me my landing page users, I'm now seeing my landing page sessions as well. And I also want to see the number of transactions. Now, I would normally look at conversions here, but because remember, the conversion tracking on this account is completely screwed up. So instead, I'm just going to look at transactions. So now I've got my landing pages, I've got my users, I've got my sessions, and I've got my transactions. Now, this table is okay. We could make this a little bit more useful. If we click on this cell type, we can choose the heat map version. And what this does is it shows us, it basically highlights any cells which are outperforming in this nice blue color, which makes it really easy to quickly analyze, oh, okay, a lot of transactions coming from the home page. Great, so that seems to be a high performing page. Not massively useful for this particular chart, but when we start analyzing different types of data, this table can get quite complicated, and it's really useful to have this heat map that sort of zeroes in on the information that we need. So which pages delivered the most traffic and conversions? We now have this information from inside this exploration. Looks like good old-fashioned pivot tables to me. Tony, you're not wrong. The next question that we might have is which traffic sources are working best? So again, two ways of answering this question. Firstly, we can go into reports and we can look at acquisitions and we can say, where are people coming from? So where are new people coming from on my user acquisition? Or we can say, where are sessions coming from in the traffic acquisition channel? The other way that we could analyze which traffic sources are working best, though, is we could set up an exploration. There are plenty of different explorations that would be useful for this source, for this job. But let's say that we're going to use this freeform one again. So we're looking at what traffic sources are working best. So under dimensions, we're going to go for, remember, our default channel group. So we're going to go session default channel group. You could also use first user default channel group if you wanted to find out where people are coming from the first time. But I don't mind. I'm just looking at where each session is coming from. So I'm going to import that into my dimensions. So let's add that into rows. Now, I'm not too bothered at this stage about looking at the different towns and cities that people are coming from. So I'm going to remove that. So now what I'm looking at is I'm looking at my different traffic sources, and I'm looking at the different devices. The columns I've got set here are across different devices. Now, I'm interested in what traffic sources are working best. So again, I want my sessions, I want my transactions, and I probably want to know sort of the equivalent of a conversion rate, right? Because I want to know, well, is a paid search visitor worth as much to me as an organic search visitor, for example? So I've got my transactions here. I'm going to add those into my values. And because we're looking at an e-commerce store here, the conversion rate isn't going to be relevant because the conversion tracking is balked for this. So what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at average revenue per user, or ARPU. And this is going to show me the value of each user that's coming onto the site. So I've added it into my metrics here. Someone's just said, once the explorations have been set up, are they saved? Yes, they are. And you can rename explorations. I think you just go up here and you just type and you can just change them. Right. Okay, so I've got my I've got my active users, I've got my number of transactions, and I've got my ARPU. Now, because we're looking at data across a whole bunch of different metrics here, I'm going to set this to my heat map, and that's going to start showing me these little pockets of interesting data. So I can see, I mean, we're looking at fairly low transaction values here. Let me just change the date range quickly so we've got a bit more data to play with. And by the way, if you're going to be using explorations, you'll notice that by default, you don't get much data. It's not saving much data. It'll probably only be saving a couple of months data for you. What you need to do is go into admin. In fact, let me just show you how to do this now. Into admin, go to data settings and then data retention. And you're going to need to change that event data retention to 14 months. That's going to allow you to keep more data to play with in your explorations. Otherwise, by default, you're only going to get a couple of months data. Anyway, let's go back over to our exploration that we've been building. Here it is. That's the one. So we can now see all of our different traffic channels here. We can see the different devices, and then we can see the relative value of each of these visitors. So, This is the sort of data that actually would have been quite difficult to get in universal analytics, but it's incredibly useful it's incredibly useful to see this data. I can immediately see, for example, that direct traffic on desktop is worth more than 10x direct traffic on mobile. I can see that my average revenue per user on tablet is really, really low. Really, really low, to the extent that this site clearly has some sort of issue with tablet visibility. With tablet usability. So I'd now be looking at what's going on with the website on tablet. What can can I run some conversion rate optimization? Can I run some heat mapping, some user recording to see what's going on with this data? Because the fact that my average revenue per user is so low is a bit of a concern. I can see the relative value of each of my paid search visitors on each of these devices as well. So I can see, for example, that my paid search traffic on mobile was really high, 13,480 visits, but the revenue per user is super, super low. So I'm turning that off, or I'm, bid adjusting that right down. Same with that tablet traffic, whereas the paid search traffic on desktop is much more useful to me. Average revenue per user of $1.53. So I'm probably putting all of that budget into desktop. So you can see how some of these insights start to pop out because we've got this type of data. I can see my email value, for example, really, really high, 622 per user on email on desktop. Not so good on mobile. So you can begin to get you can spot patterns, you can spot trends with this type of data that would have taken you a long time in universal analytics. Okay, the next question that we have answered is, how's my site performing across different devices? How is my site performing in different geographies? Now, you have a couple of different ways of looking at this. You can either look at a country basis, or you can look on a town and city basis. What do we want to look at? Let's set up a new exploration. So we're going to start this from scratch. We're going to set up another freeform one this time. We're just using freeform today. You can actually, you can choose these different visualizations, and sometimes it's more useful to have a different visualization even within the freeform technique. But this sort of table is, it's gritty and it's raw, and you can get the information that you need. Right. So what we're going to do, again, we're going to look at mobile, desktop, tablet, because that seems to be, there's quite a lot of disparity between each of these device categories. So we're going to continue with that. But now we're going to have a look at the different performance, not of city. I think that's a little bit too granular. Instead, we're going to look at different countries. So we can move that into rows and have a look there. And this will show us the different performance of our traffic in different countries. And again, we would probably want to set up transactions in our values, and we probably want to set up average revenue per user as well. Or if you are not e-commerce, then you'd be setting up conversion rate. So you can have a look at your conversion rate metric. And then this is going to give us a very quick read on which of these countries' traffic is performing best for us. And then we'd make different decisions based on that. So for example, South Korea, we're not getting much traffic, but we do have a sign of life. I'm guessing that this site doesn't accept currencies in most countries because the average revenue per user is so low. But so a very sort of quick run through of explorations. Now, Paula says, does Freeform report segment data? Yes, you can also segment data, which is another sort of layer on top of this. So for example, if you wanted to compare paid traffic and let's say organic traffic. So let's say that you wanted to, your channel, your traffic source was exactly matches organic search. So this is how you would set up another sort of segment. Yes, right, good. Then you would call this organic. So you can build these segments yourself using as many criteria as you want, and you can then compare them to each other in these tables as well. So you get another layer on top of all of this. So you can see how you're basically comparing like 4 different dimensions of data. You've got rows, you can have sub rows, you've got columns, you've got sub columns, and then you've even got segments on top of that. And then you could even do date comparison as well. So actually you're sort of up to 6 dimensions. Okay, great. So that's almost all we've got time for. Before we go though, feel free to keep asking questions because we'll be sticking around in the chat to answer some of these. I wanted to offer you a couple of pieces of help. Again, the purpose of today isn't to sell you anything, it's to sort of run you through some stuff that you might be able to use. We've got another video coming out on Monday, which is more GA4 sort of tutorials, specifically focusing on the things that you'll want to look at if you're using this to make money. But there's another couple of pieces of help that we have available. Firstly, as I mentioned, GA4 setup and training. If you need your GA4 account set up properly, if your data's, if you're seeing it twice or you're not seeing it or conversions aren't tracking or revenue's not coming through properly, then we can help you get this set up. We do all the conversion tracking as well. We'll make sure it's pulling through the data properly. If you need bespoke training based on your data in your account, we can also do this as well. Obviously, the price of this depends on, whether there's any training, the platforms that you're using and that type of stuff. But between 1,500 and 10K, depending on your needs. And you can go to exposure.ninja/GA4 to request that. Yes, we are going to have a replay of this as well. So go and do that. Now, we're not doing this to make loads of money. To be perfectly honest, by the time we've sold and delivered these things, it's barely worth doing. But the reason that we do it is because unless you have GA4 set up properly, you're not going to get any useful insights. It's like driving blind. It's really, really difficult. So you need to make sure you've got GA4 set up properly, pulling through conversions, pulling through your data before this cutoff. Well, really now, so that you're driving your business with the right data. So go to exposure.ninja/GA4, book a free consultation. We can talk you through that. We're also releasing this software that I mentioned earlier, which is Analytics 2.0. Now, you may remember, if you're an old school Exposure Ninja fan, you may remember Analytics 1, which was a piece of software that we built that plugged into Google Analytics. And here's how it works. The new Analytics is basically going to work very similar. So you plug Analytics 2 into GA4. You basically log into Analytics, you click connect, it connects to your GA4 account and pulls out data. So it crawls through all of your data and looks for areas that are performing really well. So the pieces of data or the user patterns or behaviors which are really, really strong about your site, and it marks these as strengths. But it also looks at the areas that your site's performing worst in, i.e. your top opportunities. It then prioritizes all of these things for you based on how impactful they are to your business. But that's not all. Because you don't necessarily know whether your website is performing well or not. Someone asked a question earlier about engagement rate. What's a good engagement rate? Well, it depends by industry. So Analytics 2 also compares you to other websites on average and in your industry. So it gives you a bit of a benchmark about where your data is sitting against competitors. And this is really useful because it shows you, hey, look, your conversion rate is like 50% lower than everyone else's, or your engagement rate's super high, great job. And it gives you all of this as plain English feedback. So GA4 is fantastic at taking all the data and measuring and tracking everything, but it's maybe not as easy to get the insight out of that data. Well, that's what Analytics is for. It's for taking that insight and giving you plain English next steps. It also gives you an overall analytics score. This is, think about like the domain authority, right? Which is a good measure of your website's authority based on your link profile. Well, analytics score is the proprietary analytics metric, which shows you basically your website's performance score. And there's also a free tier available. So I'm not selling you this at all. There's a free tier available. So two things that you can get some free, some GA4 help with. The exposure.ninja GA4 if you want help setting up conversion tracking. And if you want to get on the Analytics pre-release list, then go to exposure.ninja/on. This isn't available yet, by the way. Analytics isn't available yet. The GA4 help is, but the Analytics isn't available yet. We're building it and it'll probably be ready sort of late July, maybe mid-August sort of time. But if you get on the pre-release list, we'll send it to you before it's publicly available so you can start using it and get the GA4 insight that you're really looking for. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I have another call now, so I need to go. But thank you for tuning in. I hope this has been useful. Ian, thank you so much. Really, really, really nice to hear that. And Nick as well, thank you so much for your kind words there. I hope you've enjoyed this. That might be a little bit rich. I hope it's been tolerable, and I hope you feel more informed about GA4 and less overwhelmed and ready to get stuck in. I promise you, it's super powerful. It's pretty cool. It is pretty cool. Once you get used to it. So go and have a play, get excited. If you've got any questions at all, drop me an email, tim@exposureninja.com, tim@exposureninja.com, or drop a question on any of our, our YouTube videos or whatever. We try and answer all the comments that we get on those. If you're not subscribed to the Exposure Ninja YouTube channel, you need to go and do that, because when the new video releases on Monday, then you'll get it. So go to youtube.com/Exposure Ninja, click subscribe and the little bell icon, and that'll make sure that you get notified when there's a new video out. Okay, thank you, peeps. So it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Go and sign up for Analytics pre-release, go and get some GA4 help, and I will see you very soon. Over and out.